Abraham Lincoln. His name alone conjures the towering image of the man in the stovepipe hat, the sorrowful eyes, and the solemn wisdom of someone who carried an entire nation through its darkest hour. He is revered as the great emancipator, the preserver of the Union, the embodiment of humility and virtue in the White House. But what if that image, so carefully sculpted through textbooks, speeches, and monuments, tells only half the story? What if Lincoln, the man behind the myth, was also a figure of immense power, a strategist who operated in shadows when necessary, who knew that ideals often bend beneath the weight of survival? In a time of secession, civil war, and constitutional crisis, Lincoln made decisions that blurred the line between democratic leadership and authoritarian control. He suspended habeas corpus, expanded executive power beyond precedent, muzzled the press, and silenced dissent. He broke rules to preserve the republic that wrote them. The question we must ask is not whether Lincoln was good or bad, transparent or tyrannical, but rather, was he a leader who understood that the soul of a nation is sometimes held together, not by openness alone, but by the weight of unyielding control? This is the untold truth of Abraham Lincoln's leadership, a journey into the mind of a man who appeared soft-spoken and reserved, yet wielded power with surgical precision. As we peel back the layers of his legacy, we begin to see not a contradiction, but a complete portrait. Because perhaps true leadership isn't about always choosing between transparency and control. Perhaps it's knowing exactly when to become each. Long before the White House, before the Civil War etched his name in granite, Abraham Lincoln was a country lawyer from Springfield, Illinois. He had no military pedigree, no grand fortune, and no aristocratic name. What he did possess was a mind forged in hardship, a love of books, and a deep, abiding belief in the Constitution. He served a single term in Congress, gaining a modest reputation as a man of principle and clarity. When he debated Stephen Douglas, his command of logic, rhetoric, and moral gravity caught the nation's eye. Yet few could have predicted that this man would soon carry the weight of a disintegrating nation. In 1860, he was elected president with a divided vote. The South saw his rise as an existential threat to slavery and their way of life. Before Lincoln had even taken the oath of office, 7 states had seceded. By the time he stepped into the White House, the Union was a fractured map, the federal government a fragile idea. The nation he inherited was not one in need of governance, it was one in need of resuscitation. Lincoln had a lawyer's respect for procedure and precedent. But as the storm of war gathered, he faced a constitutional crisis for which there was no manual. The United States had never confronted an internal rebellion of this scale. The Constitution did not clearly define a president's authority during such chaos. And Lincoln, confronted with paralysis, chose action. He did not wait for Congress to return. He called for troops, appropriated funds, and began to blockade southern ports, all without legislative approval. These were not the decisions of a man blindly following the rules. They were the acts of a leader who understood that preserving the law sometimes requires stepping beyond it. And thus began a presidency marked not by rigid transparency, but by a flexible, adaptive grasp of power. Transparency was always part of Lincoln's political character. His speeches were thoughtful and plain-spoken. He believed in addressing the American people directly, often publishing open letters in newspapers to explain his policies. He listened, reflected, and rarely lashed out in anger. In public, he wore the mask of humility and reason. Yet behind the curtain, Lincoln was making decisions that would forever expand the scope of presidential authority. One of the most dramatic examples was his decision to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, a safeguard against unlawful detention. In the early months of the war, Confederate sympathizers in border states like Maryland posed a real threat to Union operations. Lincoln, fearing sabotage and rebellion from within, authorized the military to arrest and detain individuals without trial. Chief Justice Roger Taney ruled the move unconstitutional, but Lincoln ignored him. In Lincoln's view, allowing legal procedure to paralyze national defense was a greater danger than bending the law itself. But it didn't stop there. Lincoln sanctioned the arrest of newspaper editors who criticized his administration. He allowed mail censorship and press suppression. In some cases, dissenters were jailed merely for speaking against the draft or the war effort. To Lincoln, these were regrettable but necessary compromises. To his critics, it was tyranny. In public, Lincoln was careful. He expressed regret. He reassured the people that the Constitution would be restored once the rebellion ended. But behind closed doors, he maintained a firm grip. He understood that transparency in moments of existential crisis could become vulnerability. And he was not willing to risk the republic for the sake of appearance. Even within his own cabinet, Lincoln ruled with quiet authority. Though he surrounded himself with powerful men, many of whom had once been rivals, he carefully balanced their influence, often playing them against one another. He allowed debate, but reserved the final say for himself. The image of a collaborative presidency concealed a leadership style far more centralized than it appeared. If Lincoln's actions were controversial, his long-term strategy was masterful. He was not simply reacting to crisis, he was shaping the future. Nowhere is this more evident than in his handling of slavery. Despite his personal distaste for the institution, Lincoln entered office with no intention of abolishing slavery where it already existed. His priority was preserving the Union. But as the war dragged on and the cost in blood mounted, Lincoln recalibrated. He realized that emancipation could change the war's moral landscape. Not only would it strike at the Confederacy's economic core, but it would also galvanize support in the North and prevent foreign nations like Britain from recognizing the Confederacy. But Lincoln did not act impulsively. He waited. He prepared the Emancipation Proclamation in secret, knowing it would spark backlash. He waited for a Union victory to lend it credibility. After Antietam, he struck. The Emancipation Proclamation declared freedom for slaves in rebelling states, transforming the war from a political struggle to a moral crusade. It changed global perception. It inspired enslaved people to flee plantations and seek freedom behind Union lines. And yet, Lincoln's decision was not purely ideological. It was strategic, calculated, and released at the precise moment when it would deliver maximum impact. This pattern repeated throughout Lincoln's presidency. With his generals, he exercised extraordinary patience, but not endlessly. He replaced leaders who hesitated, who failed to press the advantage, who did not share his vision of total war. When he found Ulysses S. Grant, a man willing to pursue decisive action with relentless energy, Lincoln gave him complete command. Lincoln also anticipated political opposition. He managed public opinion through speeches, publications, and a deep understanding of narrative. He mastered the slow reveal. He leaked ideas before adopting them, tested reactions before committing, and always kept his cards close. Even the Gettysburg Address, so brief and poetic, was a carefully layered message of national purpose, framed with the weight of centuries. By the time of his re-election in 1864, Lincoln had become both a symbol of democratic perseverance and an unrivaled wielder of presidential power. His message was one of unity, but his methods had changed the presidency forever. As the war neared its end, Lincoln began to plan for reconciliation. His second inaugural address was both somber and hopeful. He spoke of healing, of mercy, of a nation wounded but enduring. He envisioned a reconstruction that would bind the states together without vengeance. But even in this, Lincoln understood that federal authority would be essential. He was preparing for a peace that would require just as much control as war. Had he lived, it's likely Lincoln would have continued to shape Reconstruction with a firm, guiding hand. His policies suggested a balance of generosity and oversight. He sought to welcome the South back into the Union while protecting the rights of newly freed people. But with his assassination, that vision died with him. In the years that followed, others would debate how much power the federal government should wield. But it was Lincoln who had shown, in a moment of unprecedented crisis, that extraordinary leadership sometimes demands extraordinary authority. His legacy became one not just of freedom, but of precedent. The question of whether he was transparent or controlling is perhaps the wrong one. Lincoln was both. He used transparency to inspire and control to protect. He communicated honestly with the people, but made decisions in secret. He upheld the ideals of liberty while temporarily restricting its expression. He was not flawless, but he was intentional. Abraham Lincoln's legacy is not just carved into stone or woven into schoolbook legends. It is alive in the institutions he shaped, the powers he expanded, and the delicate balance between ideals and action he maintained. He was a man who understood that leadership in times of peace and leadership in times of war require entirely different skill sets. He was transparent, but he was also elusive. He shared his heart with the people, but kept his strategy close to his chest. He believed in democracy, but used executive authority with unflinching confidence. He suspended liberties to preserve liberty itself. In the final measure, Abraham Lincoln was not the saint of folklore, nor the dictator of Southern nightmares. He was something rarer, a leader who understood that sometimes, to keep a republic alive, one must temporarily hold it tightly, even if it strains under the grip. Thank you for watching Leader Insight. If this exploration into the deeper truth behind Lincoln's leadership moved you, subscribe for more. And let us know, is true leadership about openness or about knowing when to close the curtain? We'll see you next time as we continue uncovering the power plays behind history's most iconic figures.